Good morning, everyone. This is Josh Johnson. We will get started in a couple, like a minute or so. If you can hear me, please let me know by using the question box. All right, thank you. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining me this morning and having me be a part of your morning. Hopefully, you all are staying warm, as I know the weather is getting a little cold around Ohio. So, all right, well, let's get started. Again, I am Josh Johnson. I am the Training and Technical Assistance Coordinator for the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio. Again, this is the 2018 Ohio Point in Time Count Housing Inventory Count Training, and we'll talk a little bit more about kind of what that means. So before I jump and get started, I want to kind of go over a couple maintenance items. So of course, our webinar is 90 minutes long, with probably a good 30 to 45 minutes at the end for more Q&A, specific time allotted to. All attendees are muted, of course, just because of the volume of people who are on the call. Throughout the webinar, you will have a couple polls that I would encourage you all to answer, and then also there will be a survey at the end of our webinar where we will just ask for your feedback as far as things that maybe next year if we want a little bit more information about XYZ, or even maybe potential trainings that you want to see in the future. Also, we will have my PowerPoint is available under the Handouts tab on your GoToWebinar control panel, and this webinar is being recorded right now. So if you have to hop off, if somebody you work with needs to wants to see it, we will have it available on Ohio's website, and I will try to send it out as well as a follow-up email. All right, so I always like to kind of give a little brief overview of what COHIO is. COHIO is the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio. We are an organization of individuals committed to ending homelessness, right? Our work centers around public policy advocacy, but we also serve as the Balanced Estate Continuum of Care of Ohio, also the SSI, SSDI Outreach, Access, and Recovery State Leads, also known as SOAR. We provide training and technical assistance, as you guys see today. We also service with Ohio Votes. We do landlord tenant law, fair housing, technical assistance, along with our info line that operates across the state for individuals who are having, landlord tenant law issues with, in their current situation. We also have the Youth Initiative program that does a lot of training and technical assistance around youth-specific topics, and we also have our annual Housing Ohio conference, which is every year in April. This year is April 9th through the 11th, in which we bring roughly to 600 to 700 providers, to Columbus, and we talk about, the best practices in, all things homelessness and housing. I just saw your question, Heaven. I'm going to touch on it right now. So our goal today is to do a brief overview of the PIC and HIC changes, and provide strategies and best practices on how to accurately and effectively complete and coordinate both the shelter and non-shelter count. So what I want to make sure I make sure we are clear is that this training right now is not as specific to violence of state. It's not specific to any COC. This is just a general Ohio, just the best practice in HUD's guidance regarding completing your PIT and HIC. So for specific information, I will encourage you all to rely on your COC. And I think sometimes for Ohio, it's a little bit confusing because we all sometimes use the same listserv. So sometimes we try our best to label things differently as far as what's violence of state specific and what's more general information for Ohio. So again, I want to reiterate that this is going to be more general for Ohio, and it is not COC specific. So some details as far as the things that are going to be specific to your area, which I would encourage you all to follow up with your local COC. I am going to speak specifically to the 2018 kind of HUD notice that they publish annually, and kind of utilize that to share that information. So again, everything I am going to be sharing is coming from the HUD notice, which is basically like a 45-page document, and then I'm just kind of pull out kind of some of the best practices and share with folks across the state. So with that being said, I will also encourage you all to read that, because of course I'm not going to be able to cover all 45 pages in a 90-minute webinar, but that is available as well, and I'll have a link for that when we get towards the end of our webinar. All right. So important changes to the housing inventory count beginning in 2018. Okay. So again, HUD released a notice. So with this being one of the first changes, HUD published its 2017 HMIS data standards in April 2017, outlining changes to the HMIS data collection. As we know, we are not required to use HMIS to generate our HIC, but HUD updated the data standards to include the data elements associated with HIC, so that communities can generate most of the data for the HIC directly from their HMIS, if desired, if they want to, right? So next, the Department of Veteran Affairs recently designated components within its grant per diem program. The 2017 HMIS data standards were updated to reflect these changes. Beginning in 2017, communities must report their GPD projects by the component types and project types. As you see with this chart on the right, it identifies the appropriate project type in HMIS and the HIC based on the GPD components. So it really does a great job of outlining what project types are associated with each GPD program component. The 2017 data standards funding sources were updated to include VA-funded contract residential services, which is consolidated of the former healthcare for the homeless, emergency housing, and residential treatment programs. So that this notice has been reflected to update to reflect that change. All right, so let's go into kind of important changes to the point in time count beginning in 2018. So HUD, and this is consistent with the 2017 HMIS data dictionary changes. HUD changed the don't identify as male as male or female or transgender to a gender response option, which is gender non-conforming, which is, as you see, not exclusively male or female. Basically, somebody who identifies as non-binary, somebody saying that they are not male or female. So they're updated to reflect that. HUD is requiring that data reported on survivors of domestic violence should be limited to reporting on those who are currently experiencing homelessness because they are fleeing domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, are stalking. As opposed to reporting on survivors with who have experienced this circumstance, has experienced these circumstances, but it's not they're not necessarily fleeing from that as you're meeting with them. So COCs are now required to report the number of children, a parenting youth, where the parent is under 18, separate from the children of parenting youth where the parent is aged 18 to 24. And again, my handouts are available under handouts, and then also for maybe a little bit more clarity on some of the maybe a little bit more information around this, you can definitely feel free to look into the HUD notice as well. All right, so that was the end of the changes, and so I kind of like to go over kind of what the HIC is. What does this mean? So I like to approach it from the most basic level, as far as, you know, if you're kind of getting new to this, right? So we know that what the HIC and the PIT are very important, right? Because it gives us a snapshot of what our homeless system looks like, right? What's needed, which of course turns into the AHAR, which is used to really make decisions about, you know, funding issues. So the HIC is a point in time inventory of projects where within your COC that provides a unit dedicated to serving persons who are homeless. It is intended to provide HUD and COCs with information about the shelter and housing capacity of homeless crisis response systems. It should reflect the number of beds and units available on the night designated for the count that are dedicated to serve persons who are homeless. If for permanent housing projects, persons who are homeless at entry per the HUD definition. So projects that work with individuals who at the beginning of them entering the project were initially homeless. So the housing inventory count report, it informs the homeless assistance community of the capacity to house persons who are homeless at local and national levels. So of course, we all know this is really important, and that's why I know you all are joining us today and doing the great work that you're doing. So what project units do we count? So beds and units included on the HIC are considered part of the COC homeless assistance system. Beds and units in the HIC must be dedicated to serving homeless persons or permanent housing projects dedicated for persons who are homeless at entry. COCs are required to include in the HIC all projects that are categorized as one of the project types that provide dedicated beds for persons who are homeless, not just those contributing client level data in the local HMIS or receiving HUD funding. This includes projects funded by other federal agencies like the VA, Health and Human Services, faith-based organizations, and other public and private funded sources. Coordination will lead to a more accurate understanding of the inventory available to serve homeless children and youth in COCs, and will hopefully lead to improved service coordination. Specifically, COCs should be sure to coordinate with the local projects funded through the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, runaway homeless youth programs, and when you're planning and conducting your HIC. So basically, make sure that you are coordinating with all of the projects in your COC or in the community who are serving the homeless population as well. However, HUD also encourages COCs to work with, your local education agencies as a participant in the count and assist COCs to identify homeless children and youth in their graphic areas. And as you see, as it kind of labels the actual clients are predominantly homeless, right? So you might have a program that has maybe 100 people. If more than roughly about 60% are homeless, then we're seeing that is a thing that primarily serves homeless individuals, people who are experiencing homelessness, excuse me. So this kind of gives a more in-depth look at kind of some of the programs that you might want to engage and coordinate with. All the ones who provide shelter and housing for the children and youth. We want to make sure that's added to the HIC. And of course, the importance of coordinating with all these great programs is to to really give an accurate depiction of the inventory available to serve this population in our communities. So the project types included in the HIC are your emergency shelter, transitional housing, your safe havens, your permanent housing, including your PSH, your permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, or other permanent housing, which consists of permanent housing with services, which means not necessarily having a disability required for entry, and of course we're including extreme weather shelters dedicated homeless inventory should be included in the HIC as well. So your shelters who are more emergency based for when the weather drops us under a certain degree in your community. For projects that serve multiple household types, but where precise number of beds are not designated exclusively for particular type of households, the total number of beds may be distributed among the household types served by the project using one of the following methodologies. Divide the beds based on how the beds were used on the night of the HIC. If the facility is not at full capacity on the night of the count, then extrapolate the distribution based on the prorated distribution of those who are served on the night of the count. Or you can divide the beds based on an average utilization, or see for projects with a fixed number of units but not fixed number of beds, can use a multiplier factor to estimate the number of beds. For example, like a program with 30 family units and an average family size of 3 equals 90 beds for households with at least one adult and one child. So projects that are not included in the HIC are, your detox facilities, your emergency rooms, your jails, acute crisis treatment centers, children who are in foster care or wards of the state. So we also look at these three kind of types of bed and unit availabilities. You have your year-round beds and units. Year-round beds or units are available on a year-round basis. Seasonal bed, which is, we're talking more or less for emergency shelters only. Seasonal beds are not available year-round, but instead are available on a planned basis with a set start and end date. During an anticipated period of higher demand for the HIC, identify only the total number of seasonal beds available for occupancy on the night of the inventory count. So also overflow beds. Overflow beds are available on an ad hoc or temporary basis during the year in response to demand that exceeds planned year-round or seasonal beds available. For the HIC, identify only the number of total number of overflow beds that were occupied on the night of the inventory count. So beds in units included on the HIC are considered part of the COC Homeless Assistance Program. Beds in units in the HIC must be dedicated to serving homeless persons. And I feel like I'm continuously repeating myself, but I just want to make sure that this point is, we definitely understand it. For the purpose of the HIC project with dedicated beds, units is one or more. The primary intent of the project is to serve homeless persons. The project verifies homeless status as a part of the eligibility determination, and the actual project clients are predominantly homeless. So now let's spend some time going through various programs that should be included. And we did that a little bit already, but of course we said the all of the emergency shelters, transitional housing, safe havens, permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, and other permanent housing. And of course, things under the rapid rehousing housing demonstration projects. So HIC and HMIS. COCs must collect and enter project descriptor data for all COCs projects in the COC's HMIS. Regardless of whether the COC project participates in HMIS, HUD strongly encourages COCs to use their HMIS data as a starting point to generate the HIC. COCs must collect and enter project descriptors data for all COC projects in the COC's HMIS. Regardless of whether the COC project participates in HMIS, instructions for collecting and entering project descriptor data in the local HMIS can be found on HUD's 2017 HMIS data standards. COCs that rely on an HMIS that is strictly programmed according to the 2017 HMIS data standards must manually input the following additional information. Whether beds are associated with a federally recognized national disaster, whether projects funding sources include Shelter Plus Care, Section 8 Moderate Rehabilitation Single Room Occupancy Program, including grants formerly funded under McKinney-Vento but renewed under Section 8, and supportive housing program funds. So, bed and unit inventory information. Bed inventory is the total number of beds available for occupancy on the night of the inventory count. For all of the relevant project types other than rapid rehousing, COCs must include all the dedicated homeless beds and units available for homeless persons on the date of the inventory count, whether beds are new, current, or under development. So, and with that being said, separate records will be created for each inventory type, which, when I said the new, current, and under development. Regardless of whether the project participates in HMIS or receives HUD funding, and regardless of whether the bed was occupied, COCs need to remember that HIC beds can only be reported once, even if funding for the housing and services are from multiple sources that may be associated with different project types. So unit inventory, the total number of units available for occupancy on the night of the inventory count. For each of the above listed household types, projects that do not have fixed number of units, like for example, like a congregate shelter program, may record the bed inventory. The number of residential facilities operated by the program are the number of rooms used for overnight accommodations for rapid rehousing projects. You would want to see see a little bit more in regards to the bed inventory on the HUD notice. And again, I will be giving that out at the end of this. So inventory types, using inventory start date and inventory end date. Your current inventory beds and units that were available on the occupancy on or before January 31st of the year prior to the count. For example, for the 2018 HIC, beds and units available for occupancy on or before January 31, 2017. New inventory are beds and units that become available for occupancy between February 1st and January 31st of the year of the count. For example of that, in 2018 HIC, beds and units available in occupancy between February 1st in 2007, January 31st, 2018. Inventory designated as new should represent an increase in capacity for the project from the previous year. To appropriately designate inventory type, the COC must compare the number of beds available at the time of the HIC in the count year with the number of beds that were previously available at the time of the previous year's HIC. Under development, that's beds and units that were fully funded but not available for occupancy as of January 31st of the year of the count. For example, for the 2018 HIC, beds and units that were fully funded but not available for the occupancy as of January 31st, 2018 would be considered under development. For inventory identified as under development, COCs must also identify whether the bed unit inventory is expected to be available for occupancy 12 months from January 31st of the previous year. An example of that is in 2018 HIC, COCs must identify whether bed unit inventory is expected to be available for occupancy by January 31st, 2019. Does everybody, can everybody still hear me pretty clear? Somebody said that my voice is breaking up a little bit, so let me know if you are still hearing me. Okay, great. If you are, and I meant to say this earlier, if you're having some type of audio or visual issue, I always encourage you to clock in and clock back out. Sometimes, things are, funny with technology. So I appreciate you letting me know that you can hear me. But if you are having some type of issues of me going in and out, I would just encourage you to, log in and log out. All right, so bed types. The bed types describes the type of beds being offered by emergency shelter projects. So we have facility-based beds, including cots or mats, located in a residential homeless assistance facility, dedicated for the use by persons who are homeless. 2, vouchers, beds located in the hotel or motel and made available by the Homeless Assistance Project through vouchers or other forms of payment. Others are beds located in a church or a facility not dedicated for use by persons who are homeless. All right, so we are going to do our first poll. And this is just a refresher. And I'm launching it now. So we have about 40% have voted. I'll give it a few more seconds. All right, so about at 70%. So I'm going to stop it in a couple seconds. All right. So we have 5% said rapid rehousing would not count for HIC. 5% said seasonal beds would not count for HIC. 91% says detox, which is an interesting percentage in total. But so the answer to that is going to be detox. Detox would not be counted for the HIC, but rapid rehousing would be, seasonal beds would be, safe havens would be. Beds in institutional, I'm just going to reiterate, beds in institutional settings are not specifically dedicated for persons who are experiencing homelessness, such as a detox facility, maybe emergency, like individuals staying in emergency room locations, jails, acute crisis or treatment centers. You can be, places where people go when they're experiencing a mental health crisis. Those would not be considered beds for your HIC count. All right, so let's go over kind of the point in time count. So this provides homeless assistance community with the data needed to understand the number and characteristics of the persons who are homeless at the time of the point in time count. So we know we talked about the HIC, which is counting kind of what is available for individuals who are experiencing homelessness in order to either have a safe place to go or to kind of help resolve. So this is kind of going to give us more of what is the number of people who need those beds, if it exceeds that amount or if it's under that amount, just giving that snapshot on that date in which we do our PIT HIC. So according to the COC's program interim rule, COCs must plan and conduct at least biennially a point in time count of homeless persons within the geographic region. PIT counts are carried out on one night in the last 10 days of January. And again, this is when I kind of encourage individuals to kind of reach out to their COCs, because different communities have a different date, a day and time, but it has to be within the last 10 days of January. HUD's PIT count data has become increasingly important as a measure of the local and national progress related to preventing and ending homelessness, especially meeting with the goal of, the United States interagencies opening doors, which is, of course, as we know, the strategic plan to prevent and end homelessness. Furthermore, there are several entities that are also utilizing the data from PIT count outside of HUD, and we need to report it as accurate reflection of various characteristics of the people who are experiencing homelessness as possible. So I want to go over some of the standards that HUD has provided for the point in time count. So COCs are responsible for planning and conducting at least biannually a PIT count of homeless persons within the geographic area that meets HUD's requirements, right? The sheltered and unsheltered counts must be conducted during the last 10 days in January and represents all homeless persons who are sheltered and unsheltered on a single night during that period. The final PIT count methodology must be approved by the COC in accordance with the COC's governance charter. All COCs should consult and collaborate with all CONPLAN jurisdictions in the geographical boundary of the COC, including those that do not have ESG funds, to assist the jurisdiction to submit PIT count data that is relevant to completing the CONPLANs. COCs must provide PIT count data to the entities responsible for the CONPLAN associated with the COC. COCs must account and report on all sheltered homeless individuals residing in the COC. COCs must be able to verify that the sheltered homeless individuals identified in the count are sheltered on the night designated for the count as defined in the homeless definition final rule. COCs should use HMIS client data as the primary data source for the sheltered PIT count for emergency shelters, safe haven, transitional housing projects that are participating in HMIS. COCs must account for and report on all unsheltered homeless individuals residing in the COC's geographic territory. COCs may exclude geographic areas where the COC has determined that there is no unsheltered homeless individuals, including areas that are uninhabitable, such as deserts. COCs must be able to verify that the unsheltered individual experiencing homelessness is identified in the count or unsheltered on the night of the count. COCs must ensure that there is an unduplicated count of the individual experiencing homelessness. The surveys of the sheltered and unsheltered persons must be administered in a manner that protects the participants' privacy and safety, as well as the safety of the person completing the survey. So I know as we are all really trying to be trauma informed in all of our scope and our focus with dealing with individuals who have experienced trauma. This is a huge part of the PIT count, is making sure that we are respectful and we are not re-traumatizing an individual who is experiencing homelessness during this process. COCs are required to ensure that people conducting the PIT count, including project staff and community volunteers, are appropriately trained about count standards, data collection procedures, and protocols for privacy, security, and for their own personal safety. And I think it will be a really good opportunity to hit on trauma-informed approaches with your volunteers. So like I said, to make sure that we are being as trauma-focused with our approaches as possible. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the point-in-time count methodology. All right, so HUD wishes to ensure that COCs are collecting accurate and reliable data on the total number and characteristics of all individuals experiencing homelessness on that single night of the count. But also, HUD definitely understands that COCs cannot count everyone, and everywhere. So they allow COCs to use a census or sampling approach, or a combination of those. In the census count, we attempt to make it a count of all persons experiencing people experiencing homelessness in the COC. A sampling count can allow a COC to sample a smaller group of individuals experiencing homelessness that are selected from the larger homeless population or a subset. HUD notes that it's preferable that COCs conduct a census count whenever practical, since it can provide the most accurate and complete information. So there is definitely caution about utilizing the sampling approach to ensure, because it's, to ensure that we are utilizing a statistically and valid and reliable sample through either random or non-random sampling. And also, as I just stated, you can use a combination of census and sampling approach, just to be as careful as possible, right? Sampling is an option if you have areas that you are covering and it's like geographically impossible for you to on that night to cover the whole geography of your area, and that's kind of where they give that little bit of grace in to utilize those sampling methods. Each project recorded in the HIC must provide a PIT count. The number should be the unduplicated number of persons served on the night of the count in the beds reported for the project. This includes all persons who enter the project on or before the date of the HIC and PIT count, and who are either still in the project or exited after the date of the count. Although rapid rehousing and PSH programs are not included in the COC-wide PIT count of homeless individuals who are sheltered and unsheltered, all rapid rehousing and PSH programs must provide PIT count for the HIC. All right, so we're going to go into our second poll. So the question is, who do you count during your PIT? Somebody who's doubled up, somebody who's staying in a PSH, somebody who's staying in an emergency shelter, a rapid rehousing participant and who is housed. So I'll give a couple more seconds. We have roughly 70% of people who have answered. All right, and I'm going to close it. So I think what I did was I allowed for multiple answers, and I guess I should have been a little bit more detailed in my request. But it still gives a really good numbers as far as, so we have at least 6% of people think doubled up would be counted during PIT. 17% think PSH, 98%, which I saw at one point was 100%. So emergency shelters, which should be counted during your PIT, and 17% said rapid rehousing participants who are housed. So I appreciate everyone who answered. So the correct answer was emergency shelter. You are not going to be counting for your PIC. People who are, when you do your PIC count on one of the last 10 days of January, you are not going to count individuals who are doubled up. You are not going to count the PSH, people who are staying in PSH. You won't count people who are in a rapid rehousing program who are housed. If people who are in a rapid rehousing program who are, not housed, because they're probably staying in an emergency shelter, or somewhere else that's, outlined as homeless by HUD, then they would be counted. But somebody who's staying in an emergency shelter would count during your PIT. So the beds of the PSH would be counted during like your HIC, but they won't be counted for your PIT. All right. All right. So the point in time count methodology, shelter count. COCs should include all individuals or families who meet the criteria of the homeless definition. This includes individuals or family living in a supervised, publicly or privately operated shelter designated to provide temporary living arrangements, including congregate shelters, transitional housing, hotels and motels paid for by charitable organizations or by federal, state, or local government programs. For low-income individuals on the night of designated for the count, this includes persons residing in safe haven projects. So kind of going over that list of point in time count methodology who do not count, individuals staying, persons residing in the following settings of the night of the count are prohibited from being included in the shelter or an unsheltered PIT count. Person included residing in PSH programs, including persons housed using HUD Veteran Affairs Supportive Housing or HUD-VASH vouchers, persons residing in a RHD project funded in the 2008 COC competition, persons counted in any location not listed on the HIC. This is like, for example, if somebody's staying in a projects with bed units not dedicated for persons who are homeless. Persons temporarily staying with family or friends, again, that's doubled up, or couch surfing. Persons who residing in housing that they rent or own, including persons residing in a rental housing and assistance from rapid housing projects on the night of the count. Individuals residing in institutions, i.e. jails, juvenile correction facilities, foster care, hospital beds, detox centers, emergency rooms. Persons receiving homeless or homeless or eviction prevention assistance, which should not be counted as well. All right. So remember that that as you start to plan or you're in the process of planning, I know we're getting closer, so I'm assuming a lot of the COCs have already kind of started or at least have the conversations. As you start, continue your plans for your local point in time count, housing inventory counts. I just want to remind you how important it is to work with all the various the homeless population to ensure that we are obtaining a detailed account of the homeless in our communities as possible. So we really want to portray an accurate account for what individuals experiencing homelessness looks like across all of our 88 counties, right? So as you see this, it talks about individuals who are disabled. We talk about veteran, domestic violence, youth, families, individuals. We want to count this population, and we also want to work with providers who provide services for these populations as well. So I really believe this is a really good time to, if you have not done so, to work in collaboration with all of your community providers. Even if they're not HUD funded, but still to work in unison with them to get this PIT count accomplished. So, and I'll go over some of those definitions of kind of like some of those terms in the population that we want to make sure we want to count when we get closer, when we get to the end. So relationship between PIT and HIC counts, right? So the sheltered PIT should equal the sheltered HIC, right? So the individuals who are staying in a bed that's counted under the HIC should be the same as people counted who are experiencing homelessness under the PIT. So they're integrally related. The sum total numbers of persons reported in emergency shelter, safe haven, and transitional housing projects in the PIT fields of the HIC must match the sum totals of shelter persons reported in the PIT count. Any discrepancy between the sum total number of the shelter persons counted on the HIC and the number of shelter persons counted on the PIT will result in a validation error, requiring the COC to make corrections. So COC should complete their unsheltered count on the night designated for the count, or what they call the night of the count approach. The COCs can also take the 7 days following the night of the count or post-night to complete service-based counts, asking, where the person stayed on the night chosen for the PIT count. So that could be at, sometimes drop-in centers, other places that have soup kitchens and places that assist usually the population who are experiencing homelessness. You have within 7 days post night to kind of still have those conversations, to kind of figure out where the individual is staying. In cases where we weren't able to track or capture somebody at that point in time at that night. So an unsheltered count may also be called a street count or night count, where that involves counting individuals who are staying in public or private places not designed for human habitation during the period between dusk and dawn on the night designated for the PIT count. So this includes, your cars, parks, abandoned buildings, buses, or train stations, airports, campgrounds, tent encampments. And this is like a really good opportunity to work with your either local street outreach providers, your path providers, if you have them in your community, to really say okay, where are individuals, usually, where are they usually at if they're staying on the land. So again, that's another really crucial piece for that collaboration part. Really talk, from a COC level of planning, really thinking who might know this information the best and bringing them to the table to help with your PIT count, of course, if you haven't already done so. So there is a lot of resources on going really deep into the methodologies and really how to do it. And I'm going to give that information as well, again, and with the and trying to be respectful of time and covering a good amount of information. I can't go as deep in the detail as far as with sampling and stuff as I'd want to, but there is really, really good resources to help with COCs who think that would be the best for them. So HUD has provided COCs with the flexibility, as I said prior, of using different unsheltered count strategies to seek an accurate count of persons experiencing homelessness within their COC's area. A complete coverage count is where the whole COC, we talked about that, is covered. And then the known location approach is utilized when the COC identifies locations where people who are unsheltered tend to congregate at night, such as a certain neighborhood or encampment, under bridges. The random sample strategy identifies all the geographic areas within the COC where individuals experiencing homelessness may be staying, and selects a sample of those areas to canvas. The service-based count is usually done on the post-night counts, where various social services are provided for persons experiencing homelessness, such as soup kitchen, food pantries, day shelters, libraries, etc. Complete an interview to determine if the person was unsheltered on the night of the count, as well as their characteristics and their descriptors. So here are some basic logical planning that goes into preparing for the PIT count. First, you should identify your PIT count committee, their roles and responsibilities, and they kind of work you through these phases to get the most accurate count that you can. I'm not going to read all of these, but this is, of course, this is something that HUD provides, and then there's also something that's on my PowerPoint for you to download and kind of go through, and kind of help with your own planning. So another huge part of this involving partner organizations, like I've already kind of said, getting individuals or other organizations who work or have experienced homelessness, homeless and housing providers, social community services, colleges and universities are really good resources, local government, faith-based organizations, libraries, businesses, and special populations, con-plan jurisdictions, federal partners such as the VA, Health and Human Services, education, FQHCs, health centers, federally qualified health centers, and law enforcement, civic groups, foundations, school liaisons, and more. And more, right? This list is not, there's still, of course, there's other individuals to bring to the table as well. But I think this gives a really good, a start of like maybe who to bring to the table. So also, securing volunteers for your PID count is, of course, like I said, vital. Volunteers should be involved throughout all stages of the count, from the initial planning to the data analysis. There are several potential organizations and persons in your community that would be willing to support this effort, and you should start now to reach out to them and assist with planning and executing the count. Some of these partners are included on the page, such as persons with lived experiences, and that's just what I was just talking about. And so those are all great people to bring to the table. And then also, once you bring them to the table, you want to really develop roles. So you have your enumerators, you have your people who maybe might be able to do the trainings, data entry and cleaning, securing donations, and offering publicity. HUD usually has like a flyer that they kind of help post. I don't know if they didn't do it this year. I just didn't see it. But you can create your own point in time count poster in your community. For instance, if you are in Cleveland, Cleveland COC's point in time count is this day, and this kind of helping to get people to get the buzz out, so people will know about it, right? Also, when we're talking about volunteer training, we want to make sure that we help them understand their expectations of kind of what we're doing, especially individuals who are going to be doing more of the outreach type of work, helping them understand kind of from a macro level of like why this is so important, why we are doing this, and how vital it is to our systems, and how vital it is to doing the great work of ending homelessness in not necessarily just in your county, but in our state, and federally, right? Making sure we have the resources we need. So we really want to make sure that we have, so that they can understand that, they can help realize they're a part of this big tool that's used to show what the work we're doing, how it's been doing, and why the work should be continued, why the funding should be continued, especially in the climate of where we're at now. We need the data. So then also training, right? And I'm going to go over what specific trainings I think will be what trainings will be great for volunteers. But again, I'm going to touch on just that whole trauma-informed approach, as they are. Like I said, especially people who are doing the outreach, they are a lot of times going to people's homes, and then making sure that they know how to make sure they're showing as much respect as possible, and they are, being like, again, respectful to the person's situation in their where they're at. So let's look at kind of how we designate a point in time count. So again, this is the date is going to be developed by your own COC, the day that they choose to do it. I know some COCs might choose the last Tuesday of the month or whatever the case may be, but that is not something that HUD enforces. But I think it would be really good for COCs to communicate with each other in order to create that snapshot on a single day in Ohio. So as you see this, it kind of talks about like how to say what day it is. The night of the count would actually be the morning of the next day. That makes sense. So if you say you're doing on the 24th, your count would actually be going, like, the 24th is the day, your actually count will be starting on the 25th, if that makes sense. All right. So here is a snapshot of kind of what like HUD's tool, like what you utilize when you're doing your surveys to go out. Again, there is a lot more tools that HUD provides, again, but also check with your COC to make sure that they don't have specific tools that they want you to use. But this is just like a kind of your general HUD tool that they provide. So to calculate your COC's unmet need for emergency shelter, transitional housing, and safe haven, rapid housing, and permanent supportive housing beds, you should take the number of unsheltered homeless persons or households needing the type of program, for instance, emergency shelter, in this example, and add it to the number of persons and households currently in emergency. From that number, you will want to subtract the total number of emergency beds available plus the number of emergency shelters beds under development. Then the number you are left with is your unmet needs. So I'll say that one more time. So your unsheltered homeless needing emergency shelter plus your number of persons in the emergency shelter minus your total emergency shelter beds plus your emergency shelter beds under development equals your unmet needs. So PSH unmet needs, so unsheltered homeless needing PSH plus your number of persons in PSH minus the total PSH beds plus PSH beds under development equals your unmet needs is need minus vacant beds PSH equals unmet needs. When determining the need of these PSH beds, you also need to take into consideration the number of vacant PSH beds in your your housing inventory and subtract the number from your unmet needs. So as you see, that's kind of what's done at the bottom. So I did want to kind of go over some of these populations, these definitions. I talked about them prior. I wanted to kind of give a detailed, help make sure we have the same definitions as, everyone. So adults, of course, is a person age 18 and older. Child is a person age under 18. A chronically homeless individual is a person who is homeless and lives in a place not meant for human habitation or a safe haven or in an emergency shelter, and has been homeless and residing in a place not meant for human habitation, a safe haven or an emergency shelter continuously for at least 1 year, or in the last 4 separate occasions in the last 3 years, where the combined length of time homelessness is 12 months, and C has a disability. So I'm not going to say all of these definitions, but I want to make sure that we have some of these. So we kind of talked about the survivors of domestic violence prior as one of the changes, as far as people who are currently fleeing domestic violence, and not necessarily people who have had domestic violence happen, in their life. So a veteran, and as you see, I kind of skipped adults with HIV/AIDS, adults with serious mental illness, and I have those definitions are on HUD's notice, but I feel like we all have the kind of that understanding. But so, and same with probably veteran, but I'm just going to read it anyway. The population includes adults who have served in active duty in the armed forces of the United States. That does not include inactive military reserves or the National Guard unless the person was called up to active duty. So youth, if persons under age 25, HUD collects and reports youth data based on the persons under 18 and persons between ages 18 and 24. So we know the difference between youth and child, right? Youth is 18 to 24, child is 18 and under. As we know, last year was a baseline year for tracking our homeless youth population. So we want to continue making sure that we are continuing that good work. And for more information on that, I'm going to provide a really good HUD guidance around getting that youth number. And then also the last year's Pitt-HIC webinar we did, Yvette Bethel did a good job of discussing kind of, how to do that. And then also we have that PowerPoint on our website. I don't think we have the recording, but we have the PowerPoint. So if you want to look at that. So, and then parenting youth are youth who identify as the parent or legal guardian of one or more children who are present with or sleeping in the same place as a youth parent, where there is no person over the age 24 in the household. Unaccompanied youth are persons under age 25 who are not accompanied by a parent or guardian and are not a parent presenting with or sleeping in the same place as his or her child. So again, unaccompanied youth are single youth, youth couples, groups of youth presenting together as a household. So I wanted to go over a little bit, just, again, this is all attached as a handout. So you can click on, if you download that and click on this link, or you can Google it, HUD's notice to 2018 HIC and PIC. Here's the HUD, the methodology guide. It kind of goes in a little more detail how to do like some of those sampling, how to do some of the, some of the mix and all that great stuff. Here is a resource on counting youth and just best practices in that regard. All right, so that is it. I got through a lot faster than I thought I would. Probably meant I was talking super fast. So if you have any questions or clarifying questions, you feel free to ask me. And again, for more details, I would encourage you to reach out to your COC. Like I said, I just did a broad overview of Pitt-HIC, how to complete it, what's HUD's guidance on it, and making sure that we all are on the same page as we go forward to do this really important All right, so I got a couple questions coming in. All right, so Jill, I am not familiar with a set date. I was talking to Erica Mulryan, the director of the Balanced Estate, before this, and it's I guess there has been in the past some time a date that they tried. I guess it just kind of never worked. HUD's guidance is the last 10 days. The Balanced Estate uses the last Tuesday of the month. So it's always been, to my understanding, and then based off the conversation I've had, it has to be in that last 10 days. But again, the Balanced Estate uses the last Tuesday, but that's not necessarily governed by any entity, to my knowledge. And if that does change, I'll reach out to you first. I'll send an email to everyone on this email personally. But you have that flexibility per HUD to pick that 10 days. So if a person, can you count a person that is homeless that goes to an emergency room? That is a really good question. So if an individual on the night of the count is in an emergency room, and so they're not counted on during the pig count, that's kind of, I think that's where they give that little bit of that grace of that 7 days to hopefully capture that individual after that 7 days. So if they spent that night in the emergency room, to be able to go to like maybe places where the individual is kind of frequent, and also put that information out there that if, to ask individuals where they stayed that night, were they literally homeless on that night and they just weren't captured because they were in the hospital, or what the case may be. So yes, I would say there's a lot more information. So the question is there more information on overflow beds? Yes. So I would encourage you all to go to the HUD HICPIT data. Again, it's roughly about 45 slides. 45 pages of information. Again, I did my best to boil it down to things that I feel like it was relevant and that could be talked about without going into too much detail and spending too much time on one particular topic. Yeah. And Tracy, if you need more information, feel free to reach out to me after this to if there's stuff specifically that you have questions about. So I got a question that can you count a person that is homeless going from treatment facility into transitional housing? That's a really good question. So on the night of the count, I guess that's what would be the deciding factor. Where were they at on the night of the count? If they were in a treatment facility, then they wouldn't be considered homeless. So I guess that would really kind of depend on that, where they're at the night of the point in time count. Because even if they're in the treatment facility and they absolutely have nowhere to go, but they're in this treatment facility, because the treatment facility does not you don't have to be homeless to enter the treatment facility. That person will not be counted on the PIC or HIT, because that bed is not for individuals experiencing homelessness. So the question is there any guidance on people to help interaction with unsheltered, the unsheltered count, I'm assuming what you're asking? So I think that's really COC specific. Of course, we want to make sure that the training, we're offering training on how to maintain safety, best practices, and safety, outreach. I would encourage you to reach out to, maybe some of your street outreach or path providers in your community, if that is available, to maybe help give some guidance on like some of the best practices that they utilize. But I think it's really important for that whole expectation, understanding, training piece is definitely crucial, especially individuals who are not familiar with the population, who's never worked there, and they just really want to help, they want to volunteer, but just helping them understand, the kind of the do's and don'ts of these type of situations. And that might be a really good future webinar. So I would love to maybe hear if that is something that we want to really dive into a little bit deeper and with more thought. I would love to hear some feedback if that would be something that we want to work towards in the future. So the youth data, 18 to 14 and 17 and younger. Therefore, we have always considered our youth count to be under 18 years old. Also, is this an incorrect way to approach our youth count? So I want to go back to the definition of our definitions, right? So our adults are 18 and up. We're counting a child as under 18. We're counting our youth as, let me make sure hopefully I didn't say something. I like to pull up the information per HUD. So youth are persons under 25, and HUD collects and reports youth data based on persons under 18 and persons between 18 and 24. And I think I personally made I think I made a grammatical error. I said it wrong. So youth, we're counting youth persons under age 25, and data based on persons under 18 and persons under people, individuals in between 18 and 24. So that was a really good question. Thank you so much, Natalie. So Tracy asked a really good question about how to approach individuals who kind of present in a way that looks like they might possibly be experiencing homelessness, but you don't want to necessarily offend them. You don't want to come across super, like accusatory and be like, just really be kind of, based off these stereotypes. Oh, you look this way, so I'm assuming you're this way. We don't want to be that way, of course. I have worked with some of the path providers around the state, and I've heard some really good tips from them around, either work, if you see somebody who you really suspect, asking them for assistance at all, letting them know kind of what you're doing, and do you know of anybody around you who might fit that criteria? Because we're really trying to help these individuals. So it's kind of a way of asking a question for them to kind of lead with their answer, right, without being accusatory. And then also it's working with, that the business where like maybe individuals might frequent, like the restaurant, they might be a really good business to work with. They might be somebody you might want to talk to and say like, hey, can you help me with, XYZ, as far as really knowing which the population who might frequent this place frequently that I'm not too aware of, if that makes sense. Yeah, Brian, I think Brian asked about, he's just really curious about the training piece and with approaches. And I think that is really, really, really valuable, is helping individuals know how to respectfully approach people. Because one of the things we have to understand that people have the right to, refuse, they have the right to, not engage. So I think just coming at it from a really respectful standpoint, and I really believe that understanding trauma and understanding trauma-informed care is huge in some of our practices, to not only disrespect people, not to hurt individuals, disrespect individuals, but then also keep our volunteers safe, because we're all kind of coming from the same angle. But yes, Brian, I think that'd be a really, really good idea. I'm going to really look into maybe developing more of a training on best practices, because it's almost more or less what we're talking about. It's kind of street outreach kind of approaches, those best practices, in which there are a lot out there. So that might be really something really good for maybe in the near future to come up with. So Steph asked, can you count an individual who's entered into a mental health institution? So on the night of the count, if they are in like an emergency mental health institution, unfortunately we cannot count them. So that goes along with like the people who are in hospitals, in those emergency rooms. Natalie offered a really good suggestion. She said that when they kind of do their outreach, they train on, this may or may not apply to you, but this is what we are conducting. And that's a really good way of not being accusatory. I really think that's a really good suggestion. Thank you so much, Natalie. All right. Well, we're ending might end a little early. I don't have any more questions. Thank you all for your questions. I think they're really helpful. Feel free to reach out to me offline, and for stuff that you might need a little more clarity on, that maybe I didn't do a good, I didn't describe it enough to anyone, feel free to reach out to me. This is my email address. You probably get some of you might get my annoying emails, but I appreciate you guys joining me, and I will hear from you soon. Please fill out the survey and let me know where we can improve. As you know, we do this pretty much annually, and we're always trying to improve it and just really help with this process. So thank you again, and again, this webinar is recorded. So. Take care.